Thank you. Welcome to our meeting this afternoon for the Planning Advisory Committee meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order and get a motion to adopt today's agenda. Councillor Elmsley, second by Councillor Seymour Fagan. All those in favor? That's carried. Any declaration of pecuniary interest? None noted. If one arises, just please let the chair know. We have members of our staff are here today. We have Mike Barkwell, community member, Councillor Vale, Councillor Seymour Fagan, Councillor Elmsley's filling in today for the mayor today, and Jason Willick is with us as well. And I'm Pat O'Reilly, and we're the person that looks after us here very well right with me today. Thank you very much. So as under the Public Meeting Act, well, I'll read you the details, but first of all, these are coming forward today are recommendations, and they will be going forward to the November 17th council meeting. So I said, just to reassure you, there are just recommendations. And under the Public Meeting Act, we're here today to gather the information on the applications before us, to hear from those wishing to make oral submissions or applications, and to allow the committee to ask questions of the applicants and the interested parties. We would ask everyone if they could kind of keep their deputations to 5 minutes, but if you need more time, and I believe IBRANs may need, that's a fairly large submission, so they may need a little extra time today. So anyway, so we'll get into our agenda today. The first item is Ian Walker, application to amend the township ops and the town of Lindsay official plan. Ian, you're up.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, to committee members. So this is actually 3 applications. The first 2 being an official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment for the land shown there on that key map that's on your screen. The developer is iBrands Developments Limited. The applicant, the Biglieri Group, Michael Testaguza, is going to speak after my presentation here, just to give you a bit more information on this proposal. So the official plan would deal with the land use designations for the property. Right now, they're looking at reconfiguring some of the existing designations that were put in place circa 2004. So some shuffling around based on changes to the proposal over time. The land has sold since the original developer. The zoning will put in place the permitted uses and the development standards for any of the new proposed lots in that subdivision, as well as looking at right now the future land uses for the remainder of the subdivision. And the third application is a draft plan of subdivision for the entire property. So these 3 applications were circulated in accordance with the Planning Act. So all the landowners within 120 meters of this property were sent notices. 3 signs were posted on the property because we have frontage on Highway 35, Thunderbridge Road at the north, and Angeline Street at the east. So the proposal, as you can see up there on the screen today, there's 2 main collector roads proposed, a north-south collector road through about the middle of the site. At the south end of it, it crosses over the existing Jennings Creek there and goes into the proposed development to the south of this, which is known as the Orsi lands. That development has not moved forward yet. There is a development further south of that, the Craft development, which council approved back in December of 2019. And this road, this main road through the north-south road through the middle would link up with the street known as Street A in that development, which runs between the residential lands on the east side and the commercial development at the southwest quadrant of that site, which is at Colborne and Highway 35. There will be another collector road that runs east-west out through to Angeline Street and exits to Angeline. It would be opposite where the south entrance to Springdale Gardens is today. So certainly this is a big application. The first part of the proposal is 330 residential dwelling units at the southwest quadrant of the site. You can see it in the color-coded area there. The red and yellow lands are the proposed residential development. The green portion travels kind of along the Jennings Creek corridor and is intended to protect those lands. And then there is stormwater issues in terms of drainage, and that stormwater ponds and that will be required on this site. So there are blocks prepared for that. There is also what they've identified as a wetland compensation block on the west side of the site. So certainly since receiving the applications and circulating them, they have gone out to all of the relevant agencies for review and comment. There are a number of high-level issues that did come up kind of through the initial review of it. Those have been noted in the report. If you're looking in the rationale section, we speak to some of the issues that have been flagged for this site. One is that the city will require at some point a municipal water tower or some form of way to have a water tank or tower at the kind of the northwest corner of the site. So we'll be looking again at there being a bit of reconfiguration on where the commercial development is going to take place. There is an existing local commercial piece designated in the existing official plan. Their proposal was to move it to the northwest corner and change it to general commercial. Again, so a number of issues from a policy perspective to sort out with that. There are a few parks, smaller parks proposed throughout the development. It's been raised that community services is looking at trying to get more linear connections between the parks and significantly larger parks that would service the whole community. There's a few things flagged there as well, such as like laneway widths for the development in behind some of the townhouses that would front on the new north-south road and the new east-west road. And some other things that we still would have to deal with. At this point, the traffic study has not been finalized for the craft development to the south, like the final approval from MTO on that traffic study, which relates to all the upgrades required for Highway 35. So once that report is finalized and approved by MTO, there will still be some additional traffic studies that that this group will prepare and kind of build on the approval of that report. So at this point, they've had to take some assumptions from that initial report, which still have to be confirmed. Some of the other issues that have been brought up is trying to ensure that we have pedestrian and bicycle movement throughout the new development and connection to the surrounding neighborhoods. That's an issue identified in both the growth plan and the provincial policy statement. There's some other kind of more technical things to look at here. And we need to still have a full comprehensive review of this. So really at this time, this is the initial public meeting. This is a significant development for Lindsay. This is a big development. It's a good news story, but we also have to make sure that we give the public time to provide input. We find out what issues are out there. And there are still a lot of technical review comments that will need to come back in, be circulated through the applicant before any further changes are made to the proposal. And this is really the chance for all the interested parties to comment on it, let it be known what their interests are, and we will take notes here. We'll keep track of what those questions are and try to get those questions addressed, so that as they refine the proposal, we can go back and make sure that that all of those comments can be addressed, or at least have been spoken to, and the developer has tried to address them to the best of their ability within reason. So with that, thank you for your time. My recommendation will remain as written in the report, is that this will come back to staff and allow the chance for further review and commenting from all of the agencies, as well as taking into account the public considerations. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ian. And Chris Marshall, our Director of Planning, has joined us today as well. Just to echo some of your words too, this is certainly one of the largest developments in my time in the city of Kawartha Lakes, and it's exciting as well, and good to hear that we're going to take time and hear from all the interested parties and their concerns, and give the developer and his staff an opportunity to address them and whatever. But we, at this point, I'll call the applicant if he wish to make his presentation now.
Certainly. Hey, everybody. My name is Michael Testacuzza from the Bigley Area Group. I'm sure that my slides are probably just waiting to load up. So, oh, there we go. My face is gone and the slides have appeared. So I'd like to thank everybody at the start just for, answering my request there to just have a bit more time. This is relatively large site. So extra time is appreciated just to go over it. But I still will try to be relatively brief and then hear the comments and feedback provided. But I think off the first, it's important for me to note that I definitely appreciate the comments we've received so far from everybody. When you're dealing with an application of this size, there's bound to be some technical things that need to be changed after the first submission. So we're very happy to receive those and very happy to work with staff and with residents and council to get this on the mark, and hopefully that second submission will be on the mark. That's that's the goal. So happy to take that comment and feedback. So thank you very much for switching that slide. Actually, that's what I was going to ask for. So as Ian mentioned, these lands are owned by iBrands, and I'm Michael Testaguzza of the Bigley Area Group, who is representing iBrands, who are the developers and owners. Site's 126 hectares large, so that'll give you a good idea of why we needed to phase the application as Ian had described. And I don't want to go too deep into this. This site is primarily agricultural at this time, and surrounded by agricultural to the north and west, Lindsay Airport to the west, existing residential to the east, and then vacant agricultural fields to the south that will eventually also redevelop. So that's an overview of the site. If you go to the next slide. This is to give a context of some of the features in the immediate vicinity of the site, but I think I just touched on those, and I'm sure people will know the site well. So if there's any specific questions on this, we could always come back to it. But suffice it to say, importantly here, that the entirety of the site is within the urban boundary, so is to be developed. From a planning context perspective, Ian went over it, but the primary reason for the official plan amendment submission is that the CKL OP from 2012 and the Lindsay OP from 2017 remain under appeal at the board, or now the tribunal, how times change. So as a result, we do have to make changes to those underlying older official plan designations to bring everything into conformance with those plans that remain under appeal.
Michael, you were just losing a little of your volume there, okay?
Oh, sorry?
We were just losing a little of your volume. Could you
Okay,
speak up a little louder?
Certainly can. Do my best right now. Okay,
That's
let me know
good.
if there's any further issues. Yes, as I was saying, mainly the reason behind the official plan amendment applications is to bring the previous planning documents into conformance with the documents that are at appeal before the board. Sorry, so you can go on to the next slide. Lost my rhythm now. Okay. So this is taking a look at the master plan, and Ian walked everybody through it. So I'll try to just take you through some of the more pertinent aspects of what we've done on the first round. And as you can see, that first phase is in the southwest corner. So that's where you have specific lotting, but the remainder of the plan is just showing street configurations to give an idea of how those subsequent phases will be lined up. Pertinent factors here. The northeast and northwest, north-south and east-west collector roads running through are highlighted in dark blue. On those streets, we are proposing a 3-meter multi-use path on one side and a sidewalk on the other. So the intention there is to allow that bike traffic to penetrate through the proposed master plan along those routes. The lighter blue leaders on this plan are showing streets where we're proposing sidewalks on both sides of the street, and those are local streets. They're primarily focused around the parks and the schools and secondary north, south, and east, west connections through the site to make sure that pedestrians can move through the site in those manners and in a safe place, especially along community facilities such as parks and schools. And then you'll notice a series of trails. Those are orange lines. Those are primarily focused along Jennings Creek. And the intention is to provide pedestrians the ability to move east-west adjacent to the natural heritage network that's provided. It's a good segue into the Natural Heritage Network. You'll notice that along Jennings Creek, the lands are primarily green. There are required buffers that are required by the Conservation Authority. Those are all being met at this time, obviously subject to their comments, but we are providing a good deal of buffering. So the entirety of the southern portion of the site is going to be natural heritage. And then, as Ian mentioned, there are several stormwater ponds primarily along the south end of the site to ensure that water is being properly detained before it's put into the creek. So you can go over to the next slide. This is phase one here. And the pertinent factors are, as Ian mentioned, 330 residential units. Sorry for the typo on this slide. I noticed it 5 minutes before the meeting, but didn't have time to rectify it with everybody. So 330 residential units in phase one, including singles, semis, and towns. Towns are in red on this plan, and you can see they're along the main arterial roads. So they'll have garages in the back. And so there, as you're walking or biking along those arterial roads, it's only going to be front doors. So that was done intentionally to reduce the amount of driveways on those streets with higher traffic and create a good pedestrian environment along those. And then everything in yellow is singles. And you'll see on the east end of this plan, a brighter orange, I'll call it, and those are the proposed locations for the semis. You'll notice that on the south part of the plan, there is the Natural Heritage Network of phase one, and that's highlighted in green. But you'll also notice a lighter green in between the Natural Heritage Network and the lotting. What the intention is there is, we want to create regular lot lines, but it also gives us the opportunity to create a pedestrian trail within and adjacent to the Natural Heritage Network, but not actually impacting those features. So that's outside of the buffers, but again, not part of residential development. And the intention there is to give a place for residents, future residents and existing, to access, be close to the Natural Heritage Network, but not actually impact it. And the intention is that will form a trail that goes through the Natural Heritage Network, through the boundaries of the swim pond and over to Highway 35 eventually. And the last thing to note with phase one is that 40% of this is actually green. So I say swim ponds, natural heritage, and parks. Another 25% is public streets. And so only 35% of this proposal at this time is even residential lots. So you can go on to the next slide. And I'll touch on these really briefly. And then if there's more questions from council or from members of the community, I can always come back to them. Official plan amendment, as mentioned by Ian, largely to bring things into conformance with that Lindsay OP. So the biggest change here is the former golf course and future residential designation, all being changed to a residential designation. The moving of that commercial block from the internal portion of the site to the northwest corner at Thunder Bridge and Highway 35, where we think there's obviously a lot more visibility to it. And then notes just to indicate that the schools and parks will obviously be more precisely located through the draft plan process rather than specifically located on as they're shown on this high level map. So you can go to the next slide. And then zoning, again, briefly touch on it. The single detached are proposed to be zoned R1 and R2. It's just depending on lot frontage. There's 50s, 55s, and 45-foot lots, so there's some distinction there. The R3 is primarily for the semis, and those two, the exceptions requested are more or less in line with what was approved to the south. The townhouses are to be zoned RM1. Now, because they're rear lane, they don't necessarily match up with the performance standards that the town has for RM1, because rear lane towns simply don't have really a home in the bylaw at this time. So there are a little bit more requested revisions to that, or we could also look at creating a brand new zone. That's something we can work with staff on in terms of that product and how we appropriately zone for it. And then the medium density blocks are zoned RM2. So that's an overview of the zoning. Obviously, open space for parks, wetland blocks, and natural heritage blocks. So that's the end of the presentation. Again, I'll take any questions you may have, and thank you for your patience as I went through that somewhat lengthy presentation.
No, thanks very much for the presentation. Lengthy, it was well needed and well deserved. Members of committee, questions of the applicant, Councillor Elmsley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for Ian as well.
Yes.
Is that appropriate?
Sure.
Thank you. I noticed in the report, Mr. Walker, that it makes no mention of Kawartha Conservation commenting on this. Has it been run past them, or is that too early in the process?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. It has been circulated to Kawartha Conservation. They are one of the review agencies. Again, keeping in mind that this is a significantly large development and they were not able to provide all their technical comments yet at this point. But there again, as are a number of agency comments are still remaining, because this, again, I'll point out, this is a significant development. So there are a lot of comments that will come through the circulation. Once we have all those comments back, we will continue to share them with the applicant so that the applicant can make the necessary responses to those comments, and in the end try to address all of the agency comments as well as the public comments to come up with a development that staff are supportive of.
Thank you for that. Perhaps a question for Mr. Testagusa, and I apologize if I mispronounced your name. One of the things that the municipality is very interested in is affordable housing, and I wondered if there is an opportunity for any of these units to be in the affordable housing milieu.
Thank you for the question, and I'll actually say that you may pronounce my name better than I do. So I'll take a stab at both of those questions. The first with regards to Kawartha Conservation. We did pre-consult with them. I just wanted to make that clear, and we did provide the buffers from all the features that they requested. So there's still going to be some commenting and back and forth certainly with them, but to date, I do hope that we've at least we're on the right foot in terms of protecting all those features along Jennings Creek that they found most important. The second with regards to affordable housing, we've actually already began those discussions with city staff. So they did reach out, I believe now maybe 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. And my client's actually in contact with staff to come up with a resolution and a solution on that front. So the intention is that that we'll continue to discuss that with staff and find the most appropriate, I guess, build form, location, ownership strategy. There's a bunch of things that need to be considered in how it's appropriately done, but the conversations have begun.
Other members of committee, any questions of the applicant? Seeing none, I just have a couple questions. There was some, I believe, a letter of correspondence that I think Ian touched on earlier around parks and size of parks and trails, and I'm sure you're going to be in contact, Michael, obviously with our Parks and Rec staff. Jen's on as well today, too. So you've just had these are very preliminary stages. I realize that, and we may hear from some other deputants today around those concerns as well. So just making you aware, I'm sure you'll get the correspondence too as well.
Exactly, and any specific requirements in terms of parks, we can always work with staff and try to make those occur. Right at this point, sometimes in some ways, the first submission is a little bit of a stab in the dark, let's say. So we're happy to work with staff and make sure that those parks are in an appropriate location and an appropriate size for what staff envision in them.
Thanks for that, Michael. At this time, I guess No, sorry, Mike, I didn't see you there, Mike. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted, I haven't had a chance to read the MTO letter, so I wonder if you could just give us an overview of what their concerns are?
Sorry, just want to make sure if that's directed to me or not.
Yes, it is, thank you.
Oh, yeah, certainly. Sorry. I just didn't want to speak out of turn. I actually have just received the MTO letter, I believe today. So I haven't reviewed the response, having worked and discussed with MTO quite extensively on this project. And without having the benefit of the comments, I can say that they're definitely and more likely than not to requiring further study with respect to the impact of the entire Jennings Creek community on Highway 35. And that's something that we've commenced the study on, working with some of the baseline assumptions from the craft study, as Ian had mentioned. And we're hoping to have something on that a little bit more detailed shortly. But I think the crux of it will be related to the impact on Highway 35 from the entire community of Jennings Creek, and any improvements that are required. So the reports needed to build on the craft report, and that was only at a level that could be built at quite recently. So it should be forthcoming shortly.
Ian, you touched on it. Did you have anything further you wanted to add to it?
Further to the MTO comments, the city's traffic consultant is working with MTO to try to resolve all the issues as far as what we'll call the HDR traffic study. HDR is the company that's done the traffic study for Craft. And it again, MTO has to agree to all of the numbers in it in terms of what traffic's coming from where. The idea is that development and that traffic study kind of sets the basis for the remainder of Jennings Creek, being the Orsi lands to the south of this property, as well as the Ibrands land to the north. The main north-south corridor, again, will run through all three developments. So it will run through basically from Thunderbridge right down to Colborne Street, right next to where the new phase 1 commercial development's going in the Craft site. So you'll have some north-south traffic going that way between each of the three subdivisions. Ultimately, there are two connections out to Highway 35. One is in the Craft along by the commercial development there. The second one will be through the next development to the south of this one, the Orsi lands. There's one connection that goes out to Highway 35. So again, from a traffic perspective, they have to look at, first of all, what's happening now with the first few hundred homes and where are they going to connect to the network, what improvements are going to be required for that. But additionally, for the full build out, 1,800 plus new homes, plus approximately 900,000 more to the south of this, plus what's already been approved in the Craft development further south. All in all, we're looking at almost 4,000 new homes in this entire quadrant here. So it's a significant undertaking between three larger developments to figure out how all this works, right?
Thanks very much for that, Ian. Maybe we'll go to our deputations if you like. First one.
We got Jamie Morris on the line.
Thank you. I'm here representing the city's Environmental Advisory Committee to advocate for the inclusion of features to encourage active transportation, features that will contribute to the health of residents and the health of our environment, both. Our city's Healthy Environment Plan, adopted by Council in 2019, includes among its recommendations expanding active transportation infrastructure and networks within urban centers that are safe, convenient, and connected. The document states that this is to be achieved by expanding on-road bikeways, dedicated bike lanes, as well as multi-purpose off-road trails. The transportation sections of the city's Integrated Community Sustainability Plan of 2014 includes the same recommendations set out in considerable detail. And as Biglieri's plan urban design analysis notes, under policy context, the Town of Lindsay official plan includes, as a design principle, established streets as safe, active, and pedestrian-friendly public spaces. We feel enabling active transportation is even more important than it's ever been. During the pandemic, more and more people in Lindsay are walking and using bicycles as a way of getting around town and for healthy exercise. We're pleased that the craft development north of Wilson Fields will have a network of bicycle lanes and multi-use pathways. And we were pleased with the process that led to incorporation of some of those features, the opportunities for local individuals and organizations to make recommendations and offer analyses of the plan as it evolved. We feel it's just as important that the same features and the same consultative process be required for the brand's development. The plans we have now have the minimum required multi-use paths on collector roads and some trail pedestrian connections, but we believe there should be more. Our specific requests in summary would be the following: that the eBrand's development be required to incorporate more extensive bicycle lanes and multi-use pathways, that these connect to the cycling pedestrian networks from the Orsi and Craft developments to the south, its neighboring neighborhoods, and to the town's system of trails, parks, and open space lands. That as the city's active transportation master plan is completed, there be further consultation between those hired to complete that plan and the developers. So what happens in the eBrand's development meshes and contributes to the overall plans. Our understanding is that the AT master plan is being tendered this month. And that we and other interested individuals and organizations be allowed to provide feedback as the development plans evolve. Two final comments, one personal, one unrelated to AT. I know there's been written submission from the health unit. It includes request that the developers provide a pedestrian and cycling plan map that shows detailed routes within the development. I think that's a great idea, personally. And finally, unrelated to AT, we're pleased, this is the Environmental Advisory Committee, we're pleased that the application includes 2 natural heritage blocks representing 21.1 hectares, generally surrounding and protecting Jennings Creek and its associated natural heritage features and floodplain. Thanks for the opportunity to comment.
Thanks, Jamie. You just remain there to see if members of the committee have any questions. Members of the committee, any questions on Jamie? Okay, thanks for your time today and your comments. Thanks, Jamie.
We have Peter Petrosoniak.
Hello. Thanks for allowing me to speak, Mr. Chairman and members of this committee. So I just wanted to highlight, I've submitted my comments in writing, so you have that. I don't want to repeat all that. And I know Bill Steffler will say a few things from Green Trails Alliance. I'm also a member of them. And some of the things that were just said by the previous deputant, I agree with all of that. Active transportation is most important. So this really speaks more to the draft plan of subdivision as opposed to the actual zoning bylaw amendments and all of that. So I'm also pleased that the Jennings Creek is going to be protected. I do feel that we should have a continuous path along Jennings Creek, and the plan that's submitted that we just saw a few minutes ago doesn't have that. There seems to be some breaks. I think that should be completely, a pathway should be complete along that, along the creek, and perhaps on both sides, and especially when the next development goes in. There should also be some sort of thought about where that traffic from Jennings Creek goes to the east. There should be connectivity in the whole town. That's a principle that that this development has connectivity inside the development, plus it has connections with the rest of the community, particularly the Victoria Rail Trail. So some thought must be given by the city about how that's going to happen. Jennings Creek continues on. I know there's a new development east of Angeline Street, and there should be some thought given to how that's going to happen, both for bicycling and for walkways. One thing I didn't realize until I heard the Michael mentioned today about the north-south, the big roads, the ones in dark blue, they're listed as collector roads with multi-use paths. They should actually have dual sidewalks. We really advocate for dual sidewalks everywhere. That speaks a little bit to what the previous deputant mentioned about having safe walkways and bike paths. I know it has bike paths, or those roads have bike paths, but they don't have sidewalks on both sides. We think there should be dual sidewalks on every road, and that is for safety as much as for anything else. It's actually to keep safe so that people who are handicapped don't have to cross streets, children don't have to cross streets when unnecessary, because eventually they'll probably have to be put in. We see that in many places. So dual sidewalks. I like the idea of a pathway around the stormwater site to the west. And also the city, I think, needs to think about having a surrounding perimeter of walkways. To their credit, the development does mention or does put in these connections from the development out to Thunderbridge Road and to the Angeline and out to Highway 35. But then there's no sidewalk around the development. These roads are major roads. There should be a sidewalk so that people can walk. And then just regarding parks, I want the city to specify how much park space is necessary under provincial policy and to make sure that this meets it. I do see some park blocks, but I would recommend a park block in that first development because we don't, in the first phase, because we don't know how long this is going to take to get to the next phase. And with 330 homes, they need a place to be as well, or a place to recreate. And so I would recommend that. I think that those are the main points that I wanted to make. There's some other points in my presentation, and I'm sure Bill Stuffer will make some further comments as well. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thanks, Peter. If you just remain there, you should know at any time you can pass your comments on to Ian, who'll be in charge of this as well as of this application. So members of the committee, do you have any questions of Peter at this time? Seeing none, sounds like you covered most of it, Peter, so thank you for taking your time and deputation today.
Thank you very much.
Next up, we have Susan Mooney. Susan, if you want to.
Yeah, I'm.
Perfect.
Yeah,
Thank
I'm
you.
here. So, hello, thank you for just hearing my comments today. I'm commenting with regard to an interest for Country Estates Retirement Home that exists at 512 Thunderbridge Road. And I realize that the plan of subdivision is quite extensive here, and the area that is being considered for immediate or more immediate development is not right in our backyard, but the plan does come up to our backyard. And I guess I have more questions than comments at this point in time because I'm looking at that plan of subdivision, the draft plan, and wondering what is going to be the official plan redesignation, the zoning designation for those blocks that surround Country Estates. Country Estates has been a retirement home for well over 20 years that people, it's a full home right now, and they enjoy, the view that they have. I know that development's coming to Lindsay, but questions about what's happening around the home specifically. So I guess I would like to see consideration for, the existence of not just our home, but the other homes along Angeline too. Like, for example, what is block 321? That's listed there. What is the proposed use for that? And 322 and 332, and then the blocks that Country Estates backs onto 323, 324, 325, 326. I see that some laneways come up to our property, and there's suggestions of potential laneway connection. Will they cut right through our property? So I'd like clarification on what that means too. So a lot of questions from our perspective on, you know, what's happening around country estates.
Is that your question?
Yeah.
I'll get you to sum up, Michael. Maybe there may be, at the end, there may be other questions, so I'll just get you if you want to do a complete there. So, Susan, are you the owner of the retirement home, or are you the CAO? Yes. You're the owner? Thank you very much for coming today, and I'll see if the members of committee have any questions of you. Members of committee? Seeing none, okay, and we'll get some information from Michael in a few minutes. May answer some of your questions.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
I think we had Bill Steffler on the line. Just trying to see if you're still there. If you're on telephone, you have to hit *6 to unmute.
Hello?
Hi, we can hear you. Yep. All right, is this Bill?
You can hear me all right? Yes, it is.
Okay, great. Thanks,
Okay.
Bill.
May I start now?
Go ahead, Bill.
Thank you for the opportunity. Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'd like to first compliment the city. I've seen an increased attention to active transportation. A few recent improvements I've seen, a new trail on the east side of the Skugog River, and the trail in Mayor's Park is being redone. And I'm also pleased that the developers included trails in the initial plans for this development. We at Green Trails believe active transportation initiatives are extremely important given the situation we find ourselves in these days. For instance, the U.S. National Household Travel Survey indicated that the proportion of children walking or cycling to school decreased from 47.7% in 1969 to 12.7% in 2009. And I expect the situation is quite similar in Canada. Now, to quote a Toronto study, when children were asked how they would like to travel to and from school, the majority of children express a preference for active modes such as walking and cycling. For example, in a survey of about 1,000 children in the city of Toronto, they found that only 2 to 3% of children cycled to or from school, but about 40% would prefer to do so if they were given a choice. So I think it's very important that we give children and adults alike active lifestyle opportunities for both transportation and recreation. And by doing this, we promote a healthier population and a healthier environment. And both of these are extremely important from both a financial perspective and a health perspective. So we'd like to see more detailed plans showing active transportation connections within this development to other developments. That puts us in a better position to provide more detailed comments. Now, with regards to trails, I understand there can be limitations, environmental and whatnot with setbacks, but as much as possible, can there be a continuous trail along Jennings Creek within this development? Can there be a continuous east-west trail along Jennings Creek to the Victoria Rail Trail, either from this development or an adjacent development? And that in part is why we need to see an overall plan for this section and how it feeds into adjacent residential areas. Now, in many of today's developments, catchwater ponds have trails around them. They provide a nice close to home circular track. And we'd like to see that be a standard policy in all developments where possible, so that it encourages people when they're close to home, they don't have to go out too far, they can get some physical activity in, etc. So in any event, thank you for the opportunity to participate. And when we get more detailed plans, I look forward to participating in the future. So again, thank you, Bill Steffler on behalf of Green Trails.
Thanks very much for your deputation today, Bill. And just remain on the phone. I'll see if members of committee have any questions of Bill. Seeing none, thanks, Bill, and look forward to hearing from you again later on.
Thank you very much.
We had Ron Flewell on the line, but I'm not sure if they actually wanted to speak. I think they were just intending to listen in, but if you did want to speak, hit *6 now and say hello. Otherwise, I'll let the chair move along. I don't think we have anyone else registered for this item.
Did you hear that, Ron? If you wish to speak, you can just hit *6, and if not, if you're just listening in, that's fine too, and there'll be more opportunities to going forward to speak to this application.
Okay, we don't need to speak at this moment. We'll listen. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for doing that. Michael, did you want to say a few words at the end here?
Certainly, and a lot of good feedback. So I've been taking notes. I hope no one thought that was me zoning out and looking down at the bottom. I was trying to keep a good diary of what's been said today. So a couple of things, and something that came up multiple times was the path along Jennings Creek. So you'll see in the phase 1 plan that, and maybe it'd be pertinent to throw up the master plan from my slides back on the screen. I'd just like to provide as much kind of info as I could. Actually, even maybe the next slide, because that'll zoom in to the specific area. There we go. So the dark green is the natural heritage network, the setbacks required by KRCA as we understand them today. And you can see between that and the start of the lots, there's the light green. And so this is the area where we frankly have the most detail. And those light green areas are conceptualized exactly for that purpose, to be a walking trails and potentially where there's, some larger areas, the city may choose to program them with even benches and sitting areas and the such. But they're areas that are not impacted by the natural features nor their setbacks. So certainly, with regards to Jennings Creek, the idea is that trail will exist in duplicate on the east side as well. So I think probably the only barrier right now to a full east-west connection is the bridge that has to go down to the Orsi lands. So that's obviously not going to be developed at this time or until such a time as there's a road to connect to on the other side of the creek. So that road is right now a future development block. And so there's no reason that in the interim, the connection wouldn't just occur naturally between the east and the west, and all the way out to Highway 35 through the storm pond, as was mentioned. The idea is also to have those trails looping around the storm ponds. And so I would think in the long term, the design of the bridge and how it can allow for pedestrians to connect under it is probably a pertinent question in order to confirm the east-west, the full connectivity east-west. I don't know that we'll have that answer now. I do apologize, but certainly in the interim scenario, there's no reason why that connection all the way through east-west wouldn't be the intention. So I hope that helps. And obviously I do want to speak to Peter and to Bill and to Jamie. And sorry, I'm consulting my notes to make sure I get everybody's names right. Before we make our second submission, to make sure that everything that they want to see is properly notated on the maps, and we can have discussions about all that. With regards to the dual sidewalks on the collector streets, we definitely took that standard from the city. So we're using the city standard for the multi-use trail and the sidewalks. So again, we can further delve into that with Peter and Bill and with the operations department. If they want to see tweaks to the cross section of the city standards, we can certainly work with them and staff to make sure that everybody's happy with how that's tweaked. Again, with regards to parks, we'll be looking to take those comments back and revise. We do have two park blocks in addition to that additional natural heritage space that we're providing in this one. One is a linear east-west park that provides connection for between Highway 35 and the development proposal. So you'll see that sandwiched in between the storm pond and the wetland block. So we think that was also obviously a nice location to kind of give access to what in the end, people said it brought up really starts to look like a natural landscape in any event. So we thought that was a nice opportunity to provide that connectivity there. And we do have another park block at the southeast corner that's really intended, and it's very small. It's about the size of a lot, but the intention is that it's a walkway block between the Natural Heritage Network and the community. So that's located in that southeast corner. And for a walkway block to be the size of a residential lot, it's actually, I think, quite oversized, but we think it's a nice way to announce to the community that this is a good space to enter. So just wanted to speak to that, but again, we're completely open to having discussions on how we need to tweak this plan to make that work. Susan, I don't want to forget your comments, so I won't. I highlighted them with a big star here. So with, and might be pertinent to flip back up to the slide before this to speak to this next point. Exactly. So as you mentioned, we don't have detailed lotting yet for the northeast quadrant there, which is probably where you're most concerned about. So let me speak to a couple of things here. Your first was with regards to zoning. So we did put in zoning with a holding provision on that block. So obviously that holding provision is going to be subject to the city having confirmation on a number of things, but one of them would be a subsequent draft plan for that area. The intention right now is that zoning only includes, open space, or it includes low-rise products, such as and anything up to and including townhomes, but nothing above and beyond the townhome built form. So certainly going to be low-rise in nature in the long term. And if there's any changes to that, you'd have to see a subsequent application. So I think from that perspective, it's not going to be high-rise developments by any stretch of the imagination, or anything even probably above 2 or 3 stories. With respect to the kind of current layout, it's very, very preliminary. What we're showing is lanes and roads basically along the edge of the property, and depending on how those are designed, that would probably be with wide boulevards between the existing kind of retirement use and those roads. There are leaders there that say connection. The intention is not that your lands are ever going to be redeveloped or a lane going through them or anything like that. That's not the intention there. The point was just to show that if the lanes in essence as they're currently shown line up on east and west, so that if for any reason that was ever an intention on your end, you do have connections to both lanes on both sides of your property. But the intention on our end is not not for any reason to show development on your lands. We understand that the retirement home is there, and I think it's definitely good for myself and you to have an offline conversation about maybe what the retirement home would like to see in its immediate environs, and in our resubmission, we can certainly adjust our plan to kind of suit the comments we receive from you. But right now, knowing that there's entrances and windows looking east and west in the rear, based on the kind of current plan for the retirement home, we try to include streets there so that residents could flow into the rest of the community rather than have backyards in essence facing the retirement home, which would kind of insulate it, and we didn't think that was as appropriate. So right now it's fairly open around the retirement home, But again, we're happy to work with you with regards to how that works out. So summary, no laneway through your site. Please don't take that and take that away from this. That's not the intention whatsoever. Currently, right now, we're making sure that there's no backyards facing your site. It's generally open to the community so that people can traverse back and forth between the two. And thirdly, zoning is low rise in nature and subject to kind of a future draft plan process at a minimum. Hope that answers most of your questions. But like I said, happy to discuss with you and we can try and revise the plan as necessary.
Thanks, Michael, for summing up there. Did you have a quick question? Mike Barkwell has one more quick question.
If I might, to Ian. Ian, in your presentation, you said that under the 3 policy amendments, one is to change the maximum height to 8 stories in the medium development, medium density. And on the chart that you have, you're showing the maximum height from 14 meters to 26 meters. So I wonder if that's just because it's standard if you go to RM2 for the height, because Michael just said that there wouldn't be any high rise. And I wonder why that's required or if it's asked for.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. The OP amendments would apply to any of the residentially designated lands, or at least the way those policy amendments are today. Like with the initial submission, is that they would apply to any of the residentially designated lands. The bulk of the property would be designated residential. So those policy exceptions would apply to the entirety of the site unless they're scoped down to only apply to certain lands. So again, this is another one of those points where this is the ask. So we now have to work between the city and the consultants with their staff to try and figure out, okay, how do we take this forward? Because the other component to keep in mind here is that the airport is just immediately west of Highway 35. There is a north-south runway that does have some impact on this property, at least the western portion of this property, in terms of height limitations, so that you don't impact on the approach and the takeoff for the airport. So the city, of course, wants to protect the airport lands from development, and at the same time, development has to be protected from the airport lands. They kind of go together. So there will be certain height restrictions in certain areas, which can be controlled through zoning, and again, can be controlled through the policy. That was the initial policy ask, and that's part of that discussion, is that the city will still be discussing this with the applicant to figure out, okay, first of all, are there any parts of the site that perhaps can support 8 stories? Because it is, again, based on elevation relative to the airport, so we have to be cognizant of that. There may be portions of the site that can support it. There may be portions that don't, because again, the lay of the land changes as you go through the site. It's a big site, 126 hectares or thereabouts, right? So almost 300 acres approximately. So certainly a bit of grade change throughout the site. The residential designation in the Lindsay official plan applies again. There's no low density residential, medium density residential designations. It's just residential. So it allows all the forms of development as a right in those designations. So again, we may have to just tailor some of the specific policy around specific parts of the site. Within the Jennings Creek development, they are not allowed to have high density residential, but they can have low density and medium density. So again, the medium density would be your buildings that are a little bit bigger, taller, mid-rise buildings, the townhouses even kind of border between the low and medium density residential, but are considered a medium density residential built form. So.
Thanks. You can just be brief there if you can, Michael.
I'll be brief. I'm sorry. Yeah. So certainly we did indicate in the zoning bylaw amendment where we thought those 8-story heights would apply, but I completely understand Ian's comments there in terms of making sure that we scope that OP amendment to match and also in consideration with the airport. So that's something we're certainly happy to work with staff on and make sure the paperwork all lines up properly. I just wanted to make sure that retirement homes aware that that the intention currently in the zoning bylaw is for those to happen in the phase 1 area, and generally speaking, kind of closer to the creek so that people can get views into the creek. That was the intention. So we'll have to work with staff on that, but I appreciate the comment.
Thanks very much. And that concludes that part of the public meeting. There's a recommendation in our folders. What's committee's wishes? Councillor Elmsley?
Move the motion as printed.
Seconder, Mike Barkwell. And basically that is to receive the report and refer it back to staff for further comments. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you all for your presentation and your time today. Next item is David Harding. It's an amendment to adjust the zoning to recognize the current contractor's shop in Manders Township. There we are, David. You're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, committee. So the owners are Mark and Kelly Connor. Notice of the application was provided in accordance with the Planning Act. All registered property owners within 500 meters of the lot were provided notice of the application, and a sign was posted on the property by the city sign company. So the application proposes to change the zoning on the property to add a contractor shop use to the list of permitted uses and to adjust the site development standards such as setbacks and parking to permit an addition to the existing building. Next slide, please. The subject property, currently zoned general commercial or C1, is located in the southwest corner of the rural community of Yelverton. Highway 7A runs along the north lot line and Yelverton Road runs along the east lot line. So this is a corner lot. There are various residential and community facility uses within the immediate area of the property. The existing 94.3 square meter building contains contains two businesses, Envirotech Installation and Envirotech Electrical Services, Inc. The approximately 278.7 square meter addition is anticipated to allow for the expansion of these two businesses and also allow for the establishment of a photography studio business, which is a permitted use within the C1 zone. The proposal is consistent with the 2020 PPS and conforms to the 2019 growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. Both of these policy documents encourage employment uses, vibrant and successful rural areas, and guide development that may impact agriculture or agricultural related uses away from those uses, being the agricultural uses. This proposal does not impact agricultural uses or agri-related uses, as it is a currently commercially zoned parcel within the center of the Yelverton area, surrounded on all sides by smaller lots containing a variety of non-agricultural uses. The proposal conforms to the City of Kawartha Lake's official plan. This area is within the prime agricultural designation. The objective in that designation is similar to the two policy documents referenced previously, that is to protect agriculture and agricultural related businesses from incompatible uses. In this case, based on the location of the lot within Yelverton, there is no adverse impacts to abutting agricultural uses that are anticipated. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, you're already on there. Thank you for flipping it over. So there, committee, we can just see the existing building in that brown color and then the proposed expansion in orange. So at this time, comments are outstanding from the Ministry of Transportation, and MTO's comments will play a critical role in the crafting of the bylaw to establish the development standards for the site. So at this time, staff does respectfully recommend that the application be referred back for further review and processing until such time as comments from the MTO are received. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks for that, David. Would the applicant or the owner wish to speak to this application?
Not at this time, thank you.
There you go. Thanks, Emma.
For you, Mr. Chair, I'm just going to add a couple of quick comments on this application. So DM Wills is the applicant on behalf of the property owners, Mark and Kelly Connor. And as David mentioned in his report, this application is seeking to amend the existing general commercial zoning on the property in order to facilitate the expansion of the buildings on the property for the Envirotech insulation and Envirotech electrical services, which have been operating out of that site since 2016. And as well, there's a small photography studio that is proposed within the expansion, the photography studio being permitted in the general commercial zoning. As David did note, there are a couple of exceptions to the general development standards that we are proposing through this application with respect to some of the setbacks, parking and loading. But I did just want to clarify for the committee that none of the existing standards on the property, or the existing setbacks rather, on the property will be further reduced. So despite the fact that there will be some deficient setbacks, they won't be more deficient than what is already existing on the property. We have reviewed staff's report and appreciate the discussion that was brought forward today and are in agreement with the recommendations and understand that MTO comments will be required before we can bring a draft bylaw forward. So at this time, we are in agreement with the staff recommendation and look forward to this coming back to PAC at a subsequent meeting. And that concludes my comments. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thanks for that presentation, Emma. Members of committee, Councillor Elmsley, question?
Very quickly, Mr. Chair, through you. Is there any time pressures on getting this done?
I guess that's to you, Emma.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Obviously, we would like to get this application through as quickly as possible, and I do understand that the development charges exemption is currently in place in the city, which is obviously something that we would like to take advantage of. So as soon as possible is always appreciated.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to Mr. Harding, do you have any time frame on when this might come back to Planning Committee and Council?
Through the chair, definitely I'm looking at targeting sooner rather than later. I understand that MTO is currently in some transition in terms of the staff that review this. So it is going to be dependent on their ability to provide those comments. But as soon as we receive them, I do expect bringing the bylaw forward shortly after.
Thank you. Any other question, members of committee? Seeing none, is there anyone else that wishes to speak to this application? Is there anyone else that wishes to speak to this application? I don't believe there's anybody signed up. Is there? I believe there's no one else that wishes to speak to this application. There's a recommendation that receive the report and refer back to staff. Councillor Bale, seconded by Jason. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much for your time today, and we'll carry on to the next application. The next is the source water official plan and zoning bylaw amendments. Anna, you're right there, and also joined us today, Leah, as well, and a whole host of folks here.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
I
Mr.
believe
Chair,
so.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm having Zoom problems, so I'm just going to close out and then try and get back in again. So if I disappear, you know why.
Yeah.
But I'm going to try and leave the Zoom meeting and shut things down and start things back up again. So just excuse me, please go ahead with Anna's presentation, but I'll just be gone for a couple of minutes.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, Anna, you can proceed.
I will actually let Leah start this off.
Go ahead, Leah.
Great, thank you. And Mr. Chair, I think we might have had some audio issues just at the start, so I'll ask yourself or Joel to let me know. Anyone who knows me knows I'm not especially soft-spoken, so hopefully I'm projecting. Are we good to go?
I believe so, Leah.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. The Policy Shop is delighted to have Jenna Stevens with us today as our guest, as our co-presenter on the Source Water Protection Program, and our proposed amendments to the city's official plan and zoning bylaws. So in addition to Jenna's role as source protection technician with Kawartha Conservation, she is also on contract with the city as our risk management official. So although the CA's coverage extends to 5 other municipalities beyond the city, Jenna's RMO duties are exclusively devoted to the city of Kawartha Lakes. We like to think of Jenna as not only our commenting partner, but as our staff colleague who happens to use office space in a different building. Then again, who's not working remotely these days? Can I get this next slide, Anna? So I'm going to kick things off by providing some background to our source water protection program, how we got here and why, then turn things over to Jenna and Anna to give you a little more about Jenna's role as the city's RMO. Then Anna will dive into how we developed the proposed amendments to the city's official plan policies and zoning bylaw provisions. And essentially how we use those policies and provisions to protect our key vulnerable areas, being wellhead protection areas and intake protection zones. Slide. This logo may be familiar to you. The purpose of the Source Water Protection Program is to safeguard human health and the environment by protecting existing and future sources of municipal residential drinking water so we can trust the tap. Slide. 2020 marks 20 years since the Walkerton tragedy. The town of Walkerton in the county of Bruce, about 2 hours northwest of Toronto, tucked between Lake Huron to the west and Georgian Bay to the east, suffered an E. coli breakout in their municipal drinking water. As a result, 7 people died and thousands more, about 2,300, which was at that time nearly half the town's population, became very ill, many of which were left with chronic health issues like liver damage. When I joined the Bruce County Planning Department 2 years later, the after effects of the tragedy were still being felt by my colleagues, by their friends, by their family. A number of factors led to the tragedy: an improperly constructed well following a very heavy rainfall, a contaminated water source, inadequate training and education of municipal staff, and insufficient reporting requirements to the province. As a result of the tragedy, an independent commission, the Walkerton Inquiry, was set up to examine the contamination of the water supply and to look into the future safety of water supplies across the province. Justice Dennis O'Connor's recommendations from the inquiry laid the foundation for legislative changes in the Clean Water Act and the establishment of comprehensive source water protection programs. They included the formation of multi-stakeholder source protection committees, and of course, the subsequent development of the science-based assessment reports that have become known to be source protection plans. I'll pause here just a moment and mention, while I was still in Bruce County, I witnessed that resilient little town turn tragedy into being home to a world-class clean water center of excellence that offers for owners, operators, and operating authorities state-of-the-art training and education information about treatment, equipment, technology, operational requirements. They conduct research, and they continue to advise the minister. So getting back to source protection plans, of note here is that where a source protection plan has taken effect, the Clean Water Act requires that planning decisions conform with significant threat policies. So of the 3 source protection plans that apply across the city's geography, 2 identify vulnerable areas in the city. Anna will dive into this a little deeper. They include the Trent and the South Georgian Bay Lake Simcoe plans. Those plans were approved in 2015 and required the city's compliance through these amendments by 2020. So we're here. We've got compliance amendments to present to you. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Jenna, our RMO. Jenna, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you. So this slide, I'm just going to give a brief summary of my role as the risk management official that Leah has kind of given a brief summary of. So as the risk management official specifically, I'm only enforcing Part 4 of the Clean Water Act. The remainder of my role as a source protection technician, that's where I deal with the rest of the Clean Water Act, but for the risk management official, it's strictly Part 4. This role really helps to ensure that municipal sources of drinking water are protected from significant drinking water threats, of which there are 22 listed in the Clean Water Act. My role also involves commenting on municipal pre-consultation applications, commenting on Conservation Authority applications, issuing Section 59 notices for these applications, negotiating risk management plans with landowners or tenants on the properties who are potentially engaged in significant drinking water threats on the properties, inspecting previously negotiated risk management plans, and also implementing an education and outreach program. Slide. So specifically under Part 4 of the Clean Water Act, it is geared to addressing some gaps that were left in the source protection program that were left by other regulatory regimes. So there's basically 3 main sections of Part 4 that I focus on, being Section 57, which is prohibition. This section is an outright ban on particular activities. It's enforced by myself as the risk management official. And it also encourages planning approval authorities to not approve applications that would result in the establishment of a significant drinking water threat. There's Section 58, which are risk management plans, which I'd mentioned on the previous slide. Those are required for existing or future activities that would be significant threats. They are a negotiation process that are carried out by myself as the risk management official and the person engaged in the activity, whether that be a tenant or the landowner. And those are to ensure that the municipal sources of drinking water are protected from those significant threats by issuing risk management measures that are going to manage those threats on the landscape. And then finally, there's Section 59, which are the restricted land uses. And those are notices that I issue as the risk management official. And I think there's a slide later on in the presentation where I kind of go through more of this process and how this works. But it identifies where prohibition or risk management plans apply for both existing and future drinking water threats. Proponents or applicants must obtain a notice from myself before filing their completed application with the municipality. And this only applies to Planning Act, Building Code Act, and Plan of Condominium applications. And these notices are required for all vulnerable areas where significant threats would be potentially on the landscape.
Okay, so in the second section, I will go over why we're proposing the amendments and specifically what we're proposing. The illustration that is before you is with respect to a multi-barrier approach that you may have noticed us refer to in our staff report, where source water protection is the first step to ensure clean and safe drinking water out of our taps. So why we're proposing this? We are proposing the source water protection official plan amendment, the zoning bylaw amendment, because they're required by the Clean Water Act. Our existing policies and schedules predate the source water protection plans, and therefore they are not aligned with the new requirements and direction. As it relates to what we're proposing, we're specifically looking at the direction from the source protection plans. And in summary, it directs us to identify key vulnerable areas and restrict future land use activities that may be threats to drinking water. So we're proposing OPA 35, which would amend the City of Kawartha Lakes official plan. The proposed zoning bylaw amendments would then implement the policies of the OPA 35. The zoning bylaw amendment applies to 14 zoning bylaws. However, instead of bringing to your attention all 14, we bring to you a generic amendment that we will translate across all 14 zoning bylaws. All language in the 14 zoning bylaws would be the same. So you've already heard a number of times the mention of key vulnerable areas. So a little bit more on that. There are 3 source protection plans that apply to our geography, being Trent, Kanaraska, and South Georgian Bay, Lake Simcoe. However, there are no vulnerable areas in the Kanaraska Source Protection Plan, and therefore at this time we're considering direction from the other two plans. Here, the key vulnerable areas that I'm referring to are wellhead protection areas or WUPAs and intake protection zones, which are IPZs. In the city, we have 23 key vulnerable areas across these two plans. This slide shows Birch Point Wellhead Protection Area, where the black dots identify the wellhead. A wellhead is simply the physical structure of the well above ground, and I have an image on the right that demonstrates what it looks like in the community. A wellhead protection area, therefore, is the area around the wellhead where these land use activities have potential to affect the quality of water that flows into the well. And as far as our proposed official plan schedule and zoning schedule, these are the examples from what we're proposing for the same Birch Point WUPA, where vulnerable areas are identified as an overlay. Another vulnerable area that I've mentioned is intake protection zone, and that's the area around surface water intakes such as lakes, rivers, streams that supply drinking water to our residents. The image on the left shows Lindsay Intake Protection Zone, where the water treatment plant is located at Mary Street, which is the selected property on the right. Both WUPAs and IPZs have been delineated through assessment reports using technical and scientific information, and boundaries of WUPAs and IPZs are exempt from appeals. And so this slide, just like with WUPAs, shows the proposed schedules for Lindsay Intake Protection Zone, what they look like in our amendments. Now, with respect to the threats, as you've heard Jenna mention, there are 22 prescribed drinking water threats. Of those 22 activities, the Source Protection Plan directs us to identify about 11 of them in our planning policies, which we do in our amendments. However, the prohibition does not apply to the entire vulnerable area, and there are further directions in source water protection plans for volume and nature of the activity that constitutes a significant water threat. So with respect to consultation, we've worked, as you may have guessed, quite closely with our risk management official, Jenna, throughout this project, and we've had an early consultation with 4 of our conservation authorities in our geography. We've circulated the drafts to the city staff in public works, engineering, municipal law enforcement, building, legal, and economic development, specifically agriculture development officer, and we've shared the drafts with the province. Now, the staff report originally, when it was published, incorporated the amendments that incorporated all the comments. Since we published the draft that we've received, since that date, we have received a few more comments following that, which we made minor revisions to the drafts, which are before you, dated November 2nd. The changes are effectively minor, and they're more so to clarify our policies and definitions. So just to be a little bit more specific, we have a connecting policy that prohibits future, or rather we have connected the policy that prohibits future land use activities better with the policy that provides that certain activities could be exempt through a Section 59 for more clarity. We've also reworded a policy, however, we have not changed the intent of that policy, and we've added language into the definitions to make sure our intent was explicit, that we're referring to activities that are considered a potential significant drinking water threat only. There are comments from the province that we don't interpret to affect the amendments before you, but that will require further discussions with the provincial staff for our overall official plan conformity review that will be occurring in the future. So before I get into Section 3, I'm sure many of you have seen these signs in our communities. In the case of an accidental spill within a drinking water protection zone, these signs notify emergency responders of vulnerable areas. to ensure that our water is not affected. So how do these amendments affect you? Overall, I want to reiterate that what we're doing is taking applicable direction from the source water protection plans and adding it into our planning documents. Furthermore, the zoning schedule shows overlays, which means that it doesn't affect any, or rather change anyone's zoning of the property. Moreover, the amendments are not intended to affect existing small and typical household uses of things like storage of fuel, road salt, storage of dense non-aqueous phase liquids or DNAPLs, such as paints or paint strippers, and other materials that may fall under one of the prohibited activities. Where there's a proposal for development via building permit or through a Planning Act application within a vulnerable area, we will use the overlay to screen those applications and flag them for the risk management official to review, and where applicable, issue a Section 59 notice. At this point, I will turn the slides over to Jenna.
Thank you, Anna. So carrying on from where Anna left off on how this affects you or your constituents or the property owners in your area, as Anna mentioned, all of the applications that the municipality receives are screened by the planning or building departments that they come into to determine their location within a vulnerable area. And if they are flagged to be within that vulnerable area, the applicant is then referred to myself. I then have the applicant complete an application package for me that outlines the details of their proposal and also includes drawings or site plans depending on their application. And once that is completed and returned to me, I then review it for completion. And once the application is deemed complete, I will either issue a Section 59 notice stating that the application proposal is fine to go through as it is, that prohibition and risk management plan policies do not apply, or that a risk management plan is required. And at that time, I would negotiate the risk management plan and then issue the notice stating as such. And then that notice is what the applicant would take to accompany their application back to the municipality for their application to be approved. Usually it doesn't take very long for the applicant to complete the application package. It's quite a simple form to fill out. And I'm always available for any questions or concerns they may have with their completion of the application package. And I often review it within 2 business days and have the notice then issued back to them. Unless a risk management plan is required, that extends those timelines slightly. And currently there are no fees for any of my services as well, which usually applicants are quite happy with.
Okay, so with respect to recommendations, provided that we've been able to review and where appropriate address all comments received to date, and provided that the official plan review, there will be an opportunity to further tweak any of our policies. Today, we're ready to recommend the policies and the zoning provisions for adoption. And if you have any questions, that is the end of our presentation.
Thanks very much, Leah, Jenna, and Anna, for your report today. That's a very lengthy and comprehensive report and a very important subject, especially for our wellhead protection and our source water protection as well. And thanks for the background there, Leah. From your previous employment, you know all too well the effects of what can happen. So anyways, Doug, did you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, and I'm not sure who wants to answer it. I have the pleasure of being the council representative on the Source Water Protection Committee, and there was a meeting last week. And one of the things that the committee is struggling with, and perhaps you could address it, is the subject of road salt. Now, most municipalities, if not all, have a salt management plan which tends to look after the municipalities' road salt issues. But where the concern comes in is with private parking lots, apartment buildings, condominiums, et cetera, where you have private contractors. And I'm sure many of us, as we go shopping and do other things, see in the wintertime a lot of salt being used in these areas because people are concerned about slips and falls and insurance claims. So I'm just wondering if there's anything in here on how, when we do planning, is there anything that goes in there about the use of salt in private enterprises?
Whoever wants to answer?
Ladies?
Yeah, go ahead,
Jenna,
Leah.
maybe do you want to make a comment to the official plan piece that speaks to road salt? And then Jenna, if I could ask you to contribute anything further from the administrative perspective.
Sure. Through you, Mr. Chair. So with respect to our policies, we have a policy that encourages road salt management. It is a challenge with respect to road salt to control that because, as you mentioned, there's a number of various considerations with respect to who's applying the salt and where that is being applied and for what reasons. However, we have tried to incorporate it to our best abilities a directional policy that could potentially be used in the future through any design guidelines or any site plan reviews that could be further addressed through that process.
Yeah, thanks. I think, we run into problems because there may be a developer or builder who builds something and understands the rules going in, but then maybe that property gets sold 2 or 3 times, and down the road, whoever is responsible does not understand, know, or remember that these things are in place, and it kind of falls between the cracks. And I guess I was looking for some kind of a magic bullet that would allow us to maybe control these things. So thanks for the answer.
I may just add more that through our policies, we're trying to encourage, although recognizing that it's not possible everywhere, use of pervious surfaces. So through that process, we're hoping to affect the amount of surfaces that would typically be salted in hopes for reducing the number of salt or amount of salt that is being used on the ground.
Christine, did you see you just come in? Did you wish to add something else? Christine Assistance? Yeah.
Hi there, good afternoon. Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, thank you very much. I just wondered if there's an opportunity through the site plan process when it comes to private property, if we could incorporate another schedule and or another line item within that agreement such that people are aware of what the salt management expectations are for that individual property. We currently do something very similar with respect to stormwater management on site plans and incorporating that into the agreement. So perhaps there's an opportunity there to have a dialogue about incorporating salt management as well, especially for those sites where it's great to incorporate pervious areas, but we do park on hard surfaces, and most development is a building, which is another hard surface. So I think when we talk about walkways, entry points, that type of thing, it might be an excellent opportunity through the site plan agreement process. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Christine. Yeah, and Chris is here watching too, so watching in, so I'm sure folks can have that discussion at the planning level as well. So anyone else, okay, members of committee, have any further questions? Members from the public, those members from public watching today, does anybody wish to speak to this application? Anyone wish to speak to this application? It doesn't look like there's anybody that wishes to speak to it. So we have a recommendation in our plans today. What Councillor Elmsley and second by Jason. At this time, then, that's that the respective source water protection official plan when all amendments be received, that the bylaw to implement the proposed official plan amendment substantially in the form attached be referred to council for adoption, and the zoning bylaw amendment substantially in the form attached as Appendix B be referred to council for adoption. Mayor and clerk be authorized to execute any documents required by the approval of these applications. Any further discussions? All those in favor? That's carried. This committee, do you want 5 minutes? Everybody okay? Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you up, Mike. Yeah. Okay, we'll just keep going. Just let me know if you want a break. Okay, and the next is Anna again. The official plan amendment number 39, amendments to the 19 city zoning bylaw to permit additional residential units. Anna, you're up again. And maybe our Leah's there with us as well, too.
Yeah, I will once again pass it on to Leah, and I'll join in a little bit later.
Thank you. All right, we can hit the next slide, please. So, Mr. Chair, thank you. Policy initiative number 2 on today's agenda, another prevent to affordable housing. We'd like to take you through a brief timeline to help set the scene and explain what are RRUs, additional residential units, how they differ to second units, how they benefit the community, and why we're proposing these amendments now. Anna's going to outline what the proposed policies and provisions mean, quite literally, on the ground, and what types of properties qualify for ARUs. We're going to wrap things up with our recommendations and our roadmap for where we're going from here. Slide. We've chosen these visuals that you're going to see throughout the presentation as a cue, sort of a simple reminder to help us refocus, right? So the primary residential unit is the existing home on the lot. It's always gray. An ARU, it's blue, can be within the existing home, but it can also be in an accessory building on the same lot. Slide. The province enacted Bill 104 in 2012, and that authorized the use of second units across Ontario, requiring municipalities to include policies for second units in their official plans and their zoning bylaws within primary dwellings or within accessory buildings. The city responded with zoning bylaw in 2014 permitting ADUs, or accessory dwelling units, in the 4 urban serviced areas of Bobcaygeon, Fenelon Falls, Omemee, and Lindsay, within existing dwellings only. In response to greater housing affordability direction in the province's growth plan and provincial policy statement of the day, the city approved its general amendment, its OPA 13, as it's come to be known, in 2017, and it included second unit policies. A number of parties appealed OPA 13, including the province, citing the policies were too narrow in scope. So after collaborating with the province and other interested parties, we presented to PAC a staff report in 2018 that included a revised second unit policy in draft. It was short-lived because soon thereafter, the province introduced ARU legislation in 2019 through Bill 108, and it essentially replaced second units with ARUs. We saw further provincial direction through the province's Housing Supply Action Plan, the 2019 Growth Plan, and the 2020 PPS. All very familiar to you by now. You hear our staff refer to these documents in their development application evaluations, and we've reported on changes to these documents to you over the past year as well. Concurrently across the city departments, our colleagues in housing were preparing an update to their 10-year housing and homelessness plan. Hope Lee, our housing manager, led that update, collaborating with us and other divisions across the corporation. stakeholders, and with the public. There were overlapping objectives with our work, and that included elements like expanding official plan policies and zoning bylaws to broaden secondary suite options, and of course, to create new forms of affordable housing. So that brings us here today, developing the city's first ARU policies and zone provisions to affect provincial legislation, to support the city's housing plan, and to respond to the community, to provide a policy framework that sets up options to increase housing supply and to build more affordable housing. Slide. Having looked at the timeline, let's step back and recap. So the Planning Act required second units within primary dwellings or accessory buildings for a total of 2 units on the lot. Slide. The city rolled out its second unit program, authorizing a second unit, but only within the primary dwelling in urban serviced areas. Slide. What we're bringing you today is a proposal to expand the former second unit program to allow an additional unit both in the existing dwelling as well as in the accessory building and across the city to also include lots other than just urban serviced areas. Now, these would be subject to performance conditions that consider things like geography, topographic features, density, servicing, access, building code, and other bylaw compliance, site design, character, ultimately everything that would make new development compatible. We'll dive a little deeper into that in just a moment. Slide. We're proposing the expanded official plan policies and provisions right now because it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do for the city and for the community. Not to mention, doing so contributes to our provincial conformity work. We know that over the last decade, vacancy rates for rental units, especially 1 and 2 bed units, have decreased dramatically, while the cost of renting has increased. We know that there's a mismatch between the demographic trends and housing options across the city. Over 65% of the city's households are 2-person or less, whereas the majority of housing options continue to be traditional family-sized dwellings. And we know that our seniors group, 65 and older and better, continues to increase. ARUs can be one of the solutions to increasing rental housing stock in the city and provide supplemental income for homeowners. They can serve smaller household sizes and address a gap in the existing housing options. They can support aging in place and reduce social isolation. They can make use of underused space and help us meet our intensification targets through a gentle density increase while more efficiently using our infrastructure. Slide. Okay, so we're here, the amendments. I'll recap the legislative and policy context, how we moved from our previous proposed second unit policy to our current proposed ARU policy, and the effect of our stakeholder engagement and consultation. Slide. So in addition to our own creative selves, we've got a number of resources we have to use to lay the groundwork for developing these amendments. The Planning Act and its regulations that require OPs and zoning bylaws to authorize ARUs in the existing dwelling and in the accessory building. Of note here is that these policies are sheltered from future appeal. Next is the province's growth plan and the PPS that encourage intensification and an appropriate, affordable, market-based, diverse range and mix of residential types, including ARUs, that meet prescribed targets to accommodate our forecasted growth well into the next 2 decades. So then we draw from other municipal examples with similar conditions to ours. We consult with our commenting partners internally across the city departments and externally with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs. We fold all of that into our preliminary draft using our 2014 zoning bylaw and our 2018 draft second unit policy as our building blocks. And of course, the integral component of the process being our engagement with the community, getting feedback and applying it. So it is an iterative process. and it results in revisions. Slide. So the drafts that we're presenting today have been revised as a result of our consultation. We've reviewed and considered all of the comments we've received. Now, some of the comments haven't led to revisions. It's been suggested that the proposed amendments rule out the possibility of creating ARUs everywhere without going through a planning process, and as such, don't uphold the Planning Act. Some examples that were presented to us included restrictive zone regulations like maximum gross floor areas. They may rule out adding floor space within a dwelling for an apartment. Recognizing only one primary dwelling on a lot, that may rule out adding an apartment in a semi or a townhouse that hasn't been severed, like in the case of a rental tenure. Only permitting ARUs on municipal roads may rule out apartments on lots accessed by private or unmaintained roads. And although not entirely specific to planning documents, by extension, some of the issues were with other related municipal bylaws and design standards for driveways and service connections. We recognize that the proposed amendments don't have the effect of permitting ARUs everywhere, but we are confident that what we're bringing forward strikes a balance between our provincial requirements and our responsibility to the community. A number of the comments we trust we've clarified and answered through this presentation and our staff report. Finally, a number of other comments resulted in changes. So on this slide, it summarizes what those changes look like. We revised language to clarify intent around how the ARUs interplay with garden suites, MDS setbacks, lot size, access, density, and location, and used consistent language throughout the document. We removed language around common parking areas and driveways and restrictions on home occupations, although we added parking requirements where home occupations are present. Okay, Anna, please, I'm begging you, take it away. Tell us how all of this background and context in the legislation translates into the proposed policy framework that we're presenting and what this means on the ground.
Okay, with pleasure. So in the next couple of slides, I will go over some of the performance standards that the properties need to meet in order to qualify for an ARU. I will preface this with that these are just conceptual examples of what the property may look like with 2 ARUs. That's not to say that every property will have 2 ARUs. And the following diagrams are obviously not to scale. So this is an example of an urban area, or what could be an urban lot. We have the primary residential dwelling unit in gray, and in accordance with the Planning Act requirements, it must be a single detached dwelling, semi-detached dwelling, or row house dwelling. However, in our zoning documents, we don't use that language. We call it townhouse dwelling. Sorry about that. The lot must have frontage and access onto a year-round municipally maintained road. There must be sewage and water service capacity to service all units on the lot as indicated by the dashed blue line. At minimum, there must be parking spaces required for the primary residential unit, which is typically 2 spaces. And ARU must have a gross floor area equal to or less than the primary residential unit. Now, ARUs are intended to be subordinate to the primary residential units. And as any new dwellings, ARU is required to comply with Ontario Building Code, Fire Code, and zoning bylaw provisions, which, as I mentioned, are standard for any new dwellings. And as similar to how ADUs were being treated, we would require that the unit be registered with the city. So in the last slide, I considered the property from the site plan perspective. If we look at the elevations of our property and what that may look like, this could be an example. Where an ARU is above a garage, the height of an accessory building or structure may be up to 10 meters. The ARU in the primary dwelling unit in this example occupies the existing GFA of the building. However, the ARU may be located on the ground floor level of the accessory building or structure, in which case the applicable zoning provisions for accessory building structures and uses would apply, which are typically 5 meters. And in this illustration, you see a basement ARU. And ultimately what we're trying to illustrate here is that there's no one way of incorporating the ARU. Now let's look at an agricultural lot. Where a property is on private services, it must be at least 0.4 hectares to accommodate septic and well. Similarly to the urban lot example, the primary dwelling unit must be one of the qualifying housing types. Generally in our rural zones, we permit single detached dwellings. In this scenario, the gray square is the primary dwelling unit, which is the single detached. Blue square is an ARU. We have an existing garden suite, green. A garden suite is currently permitted only through a temporary zoning bylaw amendment. And we are proposing to allow ARUs on a lot with a garden suite. However, in these situations, we are limiting the total number of dwelling units to a maximum of 3. Therefore, only one ARU would be permitted where there's an existing garden suite for the time that it's there. The lot must be on municipally maintained road because ARUs are intended to be all-season dwellings, and we want to ensure that the services and road maintenance reflect that. All units would need to have septic connection and have access to private water. Although we're not requiring that there be connection to the existing septic system, we are encouraging that the same system be used where there's capacity. Any ARUs in accessory buildings or structure must meet minimum distance separation from any adjacent livestock barns. This is a standard requirement for any new buildings. Now, the blue line on the site plan identifies a water feature that traverses the property. And that's to indicate that an ARU may not locate within the water setback, lands prone to flooding, and land zoned EP, which stands for environmental protection. And lastly, an ARU, just like with an urban lot, an ARU must comply with the Ontario Building Code, Fire Code, and zoning bylaw, and be registered with the city. So as it relates to the elevations, this is one concept of how the property may look. It may also be possible that an ARU be located in the primary dwelling unit where there's a garden suite. And that is it for eligibility slides. I will pass it back to Leah.
Thank you, Anna. Slide. All right, so our roadmap from here is laid out like this. If we think of all the planning instruments in a hierarchy, we've introduced you to ARUs and the proposed framework through OPA 39, Official Plan Amendment 39. That would amend the city's OP first and is at the top of the hierarchy. That action sets the policy context for the subsequent companion amendments to other municipal official plans and all the rest of the city's zoning bylaws. Due to the active appeals of the community secondary plans and our general amendment, OPA 13, the other municipal official plans for Town of Lindsay, Village of Fenland Falls, Township of Ops, and Victoria County continue to apply to varying degrees. So we intend on bringing companion amendments to those official plans to the next PAC meeting in December. The companion official plan amendments also establish the policy framework that implements the associated proposed zoning amendments for those areas. We've shown you what a generic zoning bylaw looks like, both through the appendices to the staff report and through this presentation. The generic zoning bylaw includes all possible regulations, but we know that one bylaw isn't the most effective way to regulate ARUs across the city. And so the standards in each of the 18 zoning bylaw amendments would be tailored to suit each individual zoning bylaw. For example, standards that address rural-based settings, things like minimum lot size requirements for properties on private services, are not needed for urban-based bylaws, where lots are required to connect to full municipal services. Finally, a comment on the Oak Ridges moraine policies that are embedded within our city's official plan. The ORM policies are also included in today's OPA 39. They are unique in that the Bill 108 changes for ARUs don't apply to the Oak Ridges Moraine Conservation Act or its regulations. But the ORM Conservation Plan from 2017 continues to allow one additional unit within the primary dwelling and none at all in the natural core or natural linkage areas. OPA 39 is a timely vehicle to include this small ORM update, albeit its limited scope. So we've prepared the companion Oak Ridges Moraine zoning bylaw amendment for your consideration along with OPA 39 today. Of course, pending the outcome of today's public meeting, we're asking that you recommend approval of OPA 39 and that you recommend approval of the ORM zoning bylaw. And lastly, we'd ask that you endorse our strategy to transition OPA 39 into the other municipal official plans and similarly transition the generic zoning provisions into the rest of the 18 zoning bylaws as appropriate. We would bring the companions back to you in December, together with an updated registration bylaw. Mr. Chair, if you're still with me, that concludes our presentation.
We're hanging in, Leah, and thank you and Anna both for a very comprehensive report. Affordable housing is a very important subject in our community, and under the Affordable Housing Act, we certainly have some opportunities, and you folks have certainly addressed it. And anyways, we'll see if members of committees have any reports. Any questions, Councillor Emily, followed by Councillor Seymour Fagan.
Thank you, and thank you for the work done on this and bringing it forward. This isn't my question, this is Mayor Latham's question. I'm reading his notes, and he was wondering if, is this a precursor to the consolidated bylaw? In other words, when the consolidated bylaw comes forward, it will include these amendments?
Whoever wants to answer that,
Mr.
yeah.
Chair,
That's
through you. Yes. Simply put, yes, we have been coordinating with the rest of the team working, both internally and with WSP, on the rural area zoning bylaw update. And so that team is certainly aware of the work that we are doing and that we will continue to do in the months to come. And the work will fold into the comprehensive update.
Councillor Seymour Fagan.
Yes, thank you through you. This is really exciting, and it's pretty fantastic. Thank you for working on it. Yeah, great job. So I've got a question. So if council approves everything and we start moving forward, when do you expect this bylaw to be put into place?
Thank you for your question. Mr. Chair, again, through you. What's the term of the day? I think I've heard sooner rather than later in multiple other public meetings. And I mean, the same is true. We have a body of work to prepare to bring forward to you that we intend to do for the next PAC meeting. If PAC deems it appropriate today to start with recommending approval of the ORM zoning bylaw, that would move forward to the November 17th council meeting. And should council deem it appropriate to approve the bylaw, then pending an appeal period, that bylaw would take effect 20 days thereafter. Similarly, with the material we bring you to PAC in December, should those recommendations for approval move to December's council meeting, similarly, zoning bylaw amendments for the rest of the townships would also take effect pending a 20-day appeal period beyond the December 15th council meeting date and issuance of our notice of appeal. May I add, in reference to the appeals, that the Planning Act does shelter the approval of the policies and provisions from appeal to all parties, save for the minister. I'll add as well that through coordination with our ministry rep through Municipal Affairs and Housing, we are working together with them and have consulted on these draft amendments. So we're confident that we're moving in the right direction.
Thank you very much for that. Does anybody know any builders? So thanks. Great job.
I think they're all busy. The good news story. Anyway, so does anyone else that's watching today wish to speak to this? Anyone else here wish to speak to this application? Seeing none, there's a recommendation. Do you wish to? No, you're cut off, Mike, sorry. Do you have a further question, Mike? Go ahead.
I do. Just, so you can have two ARUs on one lot as well as the primary, or you can have an ADU and an ARU and the private. Is it intended that you rent these out, or are there any restrictions on renting out the ARUs?
Whoever wishes to answer that, yeah.
Sure, Member Barkwell, thank you for your question, Mr. Chair. Through you, ownership on tenure, similarly to with home ownership, doesn't land in either the zoning bylaw or the official plan. So no, there would be no restrictions on tenancy. We recognize that it will take some time to adjust to the language. ARUs, ADUs, basement suites, accessory apartments, granny flats, secondary units, you name it. I've already gone on ad nauseum. Our colleague and chief building official, who kindly has joined us on this meeting and is available as our great resource, will attest to the number of differences in terminology that she sees. So we recognize that there's going to be subsequent to this a fair amount of education that will roll out through updates on our website and through conversations that we have at both our counters and as well in the building division. But to your question and your comment, whether it's considered an ARU or an ADU, yes, up to 2 units in addition to the primary on one lot.
Any further questions? I think it's certainly a good news story. I just sometimes one of the challenges you do get in a more urban area is parking. And it's not a negative, it's just an observation that sometimes there's more vehicles get on streets as a result of basement apartments, but it's certainly needed and necessary in our community. So there's a recommendation there, Councillor Vail, seconded by Councillor Seymour Fagan, and that is basically that the amendment that this be received for additional residential units, and that the official plan amendment and the zoning bylaw be forwarded to council for adoption on November the 17th. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much for 2 very comprehensive, well-written reports.
Thank you.
Our next item is a zoning bylaw amendment for liquidation sales. Jonathan, there you are. You're up, Jonathan.
Hello, folks. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Planning Advisory Committee. I am here to give a presentation on a proposed zoning bylaw amendment with regards to liquidation sales. There is a slide I had. Is that one? There we go. Perfect. Thank you. So this, a little bit of background first is pretty important for this particular application, just so that it's not kind of coming at you from nowhere. So this particular zoning bylaw amendment is in response to a recommendation put forward by the Liquidation Sales Task Force. This task force was established in 2018 and had 4 meetings that year. The intent of the task force was to review regulations for liquidation sales within the city of Kawartha Lakes. From those 4 meetings, 4 recommendations, 3 options were put forward from that group. One, with all regard to liquidation sales within the city. The first one was to keep them moving as status quo. So there would be no reviews or no amendments with regard to liquidation sales. The second one was to outright prohibit liquidation sales from the city of Kawartha Lakes. And this committee was built in response to there being significant pushback and not really an appetite for this type of sale within the municipality, as it was seen as driving customers away from local businesses within the area. The third option, as I was speaking to, was to regulate liquidation sales. This option was the one that was recommended by the Liquidation Sales Task Force and included in a report that went forward to City Council in 2018. So from that report, there were a handful of Liquidation Sales Task Force recommendations. The one I'll be speaking to today was to state that to incorporate an appropriate definition for the regulation of liquidation sales into the city's zoning bylaws to regulate the location of these uses. So what you have as point 3 is the proposed definition for said use, that a liquidation sale means a special sales event where predominantly overproduction, end of line, or other goods are sold at a discounted rate. So by incorporating this definition into all 18 zoning bylaws and leaving it just as a definition, effectively, the only way to permit such a use is to go through a zoning bylaw amendment, which would facilitate the public hearing process and offer residents and business owners to provide their comments and concerns with any proposed use. The existing liquidation sales that are occurring now would be considered legal non-conforming and would require a zoning bylaw amendment to increase their use or their frequency. That, in a nutshell, is the intent of this zoning bylaw amendment. And you will also note that one of the other recommendations, as stated on the slide, was to amend the bylaw 2016 to 10. Following conversations with our colleagues in municipal bylaw enforcement, this is something that is going to be occurring following the finalization of the definition that's in front of you. This amendment was advertised in the Kawartha this week, as well as Peterborough this week, and were sent to the members of the now defunct Liquidation Sales Task Force. I did hear back from Mr. Harry Stoddart saying that he had no concerns with the definition as it is written. And I will take questions on the proposed amendment.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. Members of the committee, any questions? Councillor Elmsley?
Must be my day, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Thank you for the report. My question is, why are we being asked to refer it back to staff if the liquidation task force went through it, and I know they had public meetings, and you've received no other comments on it? I'm just wondering why it's being referred back to staff and not being sent to council for approval.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Excellent question, and that is something that we did consider. Because there was potential for comments to come in from the public, there was nothing that came in at the time of writing this report, nor have there been any since then. The materials can be prepared if the Planning Advisory Committee so wishes, and the recommendation could be made that this could move forward to City Council, given that the public hearing for this has effectively happened today.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'd like to see some time limit on it so that it comes to council fairly quickly, so that we can deal with it and have it in place You know, perhaps even for the Christmas season when sometimes these things do occur. So whatever you can do to hurry up the process would be great.
Thank
Absolutely.
you. Did anyone else have any questions? Seeing none from the committee, anyone else watching today have any questions or concerns about the liquidation recommendations? Anyone else have any concerns? Did we have anybody wish to speak to it, Joel? No, we didn't. It was discussed at our BIA meeting last week in Lindsay, and I know some people before had some concerns, but they felt as though they were addressed and they didn't have any further concerns. That's just from the local BIA in Lindsay. So I believe, if I understand you correctly, Jonathan, if there aren't any concerns today, that the recommendation we could make a recommendation for this to go forward as of today. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, yes, that's correct. The requisite materials could be prepared and we could have it to council. The primary, well, the amendment is going to be a definition that will go into all of the zoning bylaws. So it'll be an exercise just to get everything lined up. But yes, it could go forward.
Thank you for that. What's committee's wishes? Councillor Vail? Seconder? Jason? Yeah, good forward for the November 17th meeting. Pardon?
Put it forward on the
November 17th.
November 17th.
Yes, if staff can get it prepared in time. That'd be great, Jonathan. Any further discussion on this? Seeing none, all those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much, Jonathan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Planning Advisory Committee.
Thank you. Okay. Keep going. Are we doing okay, folks, here? Okay. That concludes our public meeting, part of our agenda today. Next, there's no deputations. Don't believe there's any correspondence. And the next is Christina Sissons on the registered subdivision agreement update. Christina, you're up.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I'm pleased to report that as an update to our report to you last year, we have found a great success in the status update. It has helped us to monitor, oh, the lights just went off in my room, sorry, has helped us to monitor the activity within the registered subdivision agreements. Again, these are those that have lots existing. And what has happened over this particularly difficult or different, unusual year, challenging and tragic for some during this pandemic, is that we've actually recognized that the opportunity to reach out to all of the subdividers and actually talk to them and communicate with them in terms of where are you with their status, help them with what we know, what information the municipality has been a great opportunity to provide some economic support to them. So we are here today with our current list. It has been updated as of last week. Thank you. And, or as of last month, my apologies. And we are here to answer any questions you may have. We wish to continue this particular process, by the way, because we think it's an excellent opportunity at different times to reach out to the developers and find out exactly where they are with their process. We can provide them, as I say, with our information, and that just helps keep the intent going in terms of getting some build up, etc. And as you'll note in that chart, a lot of subdivisions are actually at the 100% build out, which is a great good news story for our community for this particular year as well. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Christine. Members of the committee, there's a list in your report. Does anybody have any questions on any of the items on the list? Seeing Councillor Vail.
Just, does this list have every subdivision that's on the go in the city right now?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, these are the subdivisions for which we are aware of registration and have agreements for, and are currently being asked to hold security and monitor them to the best of our knowledge, correct?
Okay, I don't see anything about the Maple Hills subdivision in Woodville on here.
We call it, oh, sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, we call it Mancini. If I can.
That's correct.
pull that up. So it does indicate the number of houses that have exploded up in that area.
Is it on this report, is it? Is that what
It's
you're...
as part of the attachment. Let's see. I don't know if I can share my screen successfully. It's at the top of the second page.
Sorry, I see it now.
Maple Hills Phase 2. So we were really pleased. That's a scenario whereby that particular subdivision in Woodville, as an example, had been sitting, I don't want to use the word stagnant, that has a negative connotation, but in essence, we hadn't seen any build out occurring there. We had done the inspection, commissioning, et cetera, of the water main, and we were all looking forward to that actually proceeding. And then all of a sudden, there's been great uptake in the build out of that particular subdivision. This was a subdivision for which they had put up 100% security. They had paid their DCs ahead of time, development charges, and we were waiting and hoping that they would be able to keep moving. And so it's been great satisfaction for staff and I believe for their team that they've been able to work through the requirements for occupancy, work through the requirements for security reduction, et cetera. So that's, again, as I say, it's a positive time, which again, during a pandemic is sort of, I'm hesitant to use that word, but from our perspective, there has been a great uptake in the building of homes and allowing for people to move into our community and to realize on living in our community, which I think is really important at this time.
Thanks, Christine. Any further questions, committee? Is there any update on any of the phases on the Pearson Farms, Christine?
We are understanding that Pearson Phase 5 is lapsing potentially. The draft plan later, at least this month, maybe next month. I'm not sure the precise date off the top of my head. So we've been waiting to see where that particular process is going because that greatly affects the previous phases, particularly Phase 4B. And so that's certainly something we've been drafting a letter. We've been trying to align all of the paperwork that we have. As you note on this, there are several of the phases that are completely built out. So we are looking to do an update letter to the developer there as well in short order, hopefully before the end of the year, if not at the beginning of next year.
So you'll be reaching out to Mr. Stoller just to make him aware that Phase 5 may be expiring?
Well, that's typically something that would occur through the planning division, but indeed, that's what we've been waiting to see how everybody wants to communicate that. Again, it's easier to work with a developer. For instance, a developer for Elysian Fields and for the Black Bear is the same individual. So we've been trying to work on letters that are specific to the development, but also try to work with one developer at a time with respect to the various projects. So as I say, we were hoping to have that answer on Phase 5 prior to actually reaching out so that we don't trip into a different process or a different discussion, but we can discuss with our planning partners.
Thank you. Mike, did you have a question?
This is a list of active plans of subdivision. Do you have a list of plans of subdivision that have been approved but are not active?
So draft plan approvals are a component, through you, Mr. Chair. Draft plan approvals are a component of what the planning division typically keeps a handle on. Indeed, I have that tracked to some extent for what I am aware of, but I do understand that a couple of years ago, they went through an exhaustive process of going through all the files, et cetera, to determine exactly which properties in our community have draft plan status. So I don't have all of those details, but we do try and keep track of those draft plans that have occurred within the last 10 years that we are aware of. So that, and those are usually the ones where people have been commenting to us or providing submissions for designs, et cetera, or asking questions about what the particular guidelines might be, et cetera. I'm not sure that really answered your question. Perhaps Director Marshall would like to speak to that overall project that I know that planning had underwent.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, we did have Janet Wong working on a sort of exhaustive list of all the subdivisions that were draft approved. So I'll certainly go back and find out where that's at. Obviously, she's not with us anymore, so I'm not sure at what stage she left the work at. So I'll have to get back to you once I talk to Richard about that to find out the status of that.
That's not why she retired, was it? Mike, go ahead.
Yesterday at the council meeting, you had talked about a concierge and about a tracking form that had, and you had mentioned there were 134 plans or site plans or applications that are being tracked. So I just wondered, could I have a copy of that to see where it's going and to see who's on the list? That'd be helpful.
Yeah, we are planning to bring that to the next planning committee. We're still working on completing that spreadsheet. So we do plan to bring it forward to the next planning advisory committee. And so if you could just be patient, it will come next month.
Okay, thank you very much. If we could get it a bit earlier than the week before, I find this is very, it's hard to get through everything. So if you have it before then, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for that. Any further questions? Seeing none, there's a recommendation in our report. What's committee's wishes? Councillor Elmsley, second by Jason. And that is the registered subdivision status be received and the staff be directed to continue to provide annual updates for continued communication, process improvement, and to support the development community. Further discussion? All those in favor? That's carried. And I believe the final one on our agenda today is the assumption of the Gilson Point subdivision. And Christina.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Again, we're pleased to say at this time that we've been able to reach assumption for a legacy project. Through the work of these updates, as I said in my previous report, Gilson Point subdivision in Mariposa is certainly a success story. It is one of those scenarios whereby, unfortunately, one of the developers is deceased. There was a transfer of ownership to the son and one of the original partners. And when we encounter those types of scenarios, there can sometimes be delays in the process, delays in the realization of what we have established through the subdivision agreements. So it's been a lot of work on both the development team in terms of the developers did band together. They worked with their professionals. We were fortunate enough that the professional engineering firm still existed. We were able to work with the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks to get an environmental compliance approval for the existing pond. That was something that hadn't been applied for previously, but was really a criteria that we needed for assumption. So realistically, working through the process with this particular group has actually helped to form some of the documentation that we are now working towards. So we're pleased to report that the works that have been completed out there are to our satisfaction. Everything has been deemed complete, and we are now satisfied and would recommend that we assume this subdivision so that we add to our list of roads that are actually improved. I'm open to any questions.
Thanks for that report. Members of the committee, any questions of Christine on the Gilson subdivision? There's a recommendation in there. Could I get a mover for that? Councillor Vale, seconded by Councillor Seymour Fagan. Any questions? All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much. I believe that concludes our agenda for today. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Seymour Fagan. All those in favor? Who's not? Have a good rest of the day. Enjoy the weather out there.